think Bob says it was Daniel that's in Chicago, not David. I think David's upstairs. But I have made many mistakes before, so I'm not going to fuss at Bob. Just as a, I don't know, it's not even an introduction, just as a statement. My wife and I were trying to stay warm last night. She happened to play "O Holy Night," which was it. The particular version she was playing was very beautiful, and I enjoyed it. But I was reminded of, it's not in our book. I would have had us sing it today if it's in the electronic. Well, maybe we could sing it one of these days. But there's one of the lines in it that I have always appreciated very much. And it's the line that says, "Fall on your knees. Oh, hear the angel voices." You know, when I was growing up, Mom and Dad, my dad was preaching in Birmingham, Alabama. And they had two or three traditions there in Alabama that were always interesting to me. They all the women wore the covering, and that was interesting. But also, they all knelt. Everybody did, men, women. Everybody knelt when they prayed. And maybe, I don't think the Bible makes any distinction about position in prayer. But it might be better if every now and then we fell on our knees to hear the angel voices. But anyway, this sermon is an old sermon. I discovered it in my notes, I don't know, many years ago. Just to show you how old it is, I saved this. This was the original first slide. Now, I'm not going to hold this up here too long because there's a lot of our members in this picture that are deceased. A lot of them, there's two or three of them I can't make out the kids. I don't know. They grew up. I don't know what in the world the picture isn't good enough for me to tell. But what this church needs, I'm not going to keep it up there too long because it's a little too nostalgic for me. In Ephesians 4, it says that we should henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, carried about with every wind of doctrine, with the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love, may grow up unto him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplies, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. And so as we think about this morning as to what this church needs, this is our view. What do we need to do to make this congregation better? And I have to say, this lesson, as I looked through the lesson, I think that the church has made some improvement on some of the things that I was talking about, but perhaps we can even do better. One of the points I made, because I don't want to leave myself out, is we might need better leadership. Now, I don't mean to say that Alan's not doing a good job, or our deacons, but we can always do better. And I don't know whether I was telling Bob, there's something wrong this morning. There's something wrong with my mirror. I keep looking in that mirror, and that old man keeps looking back at me. I don't know who that guy is. Where'd he come from? Bill is now in his 80s. Hopefully he'll be back next week. We're looking forward to seeing him. I'm getting older. And Alan is the youngest of us as elders. But as you look around at our deacons and our elders, you've got to think, if you will, if it's possible, if the Lord doesn't return 10 or 20 years down the road, who's going to be leading? Are we developing the men and women who can lead this church in the future? I could name several of the ladies here who've been a tremendous influence for years in leading the church just as well as some of these men, maybe not in an official capacity, but leaders nonetheless. In 1 Peter 5, it says, "The elders which are among you I exhort, whom also an elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being examples to the flock." Now that's one of the things that if you're going to lead, that you need to think about seriously. It's not just a position of honor. There is some honor to it, but it's a position where you're going to need to be the example. You're going to need to be the feeder of the flock. Have you studied enough? Have you governed your own life, raised your own children and your family to the point that you can then spread out from that family, and others will say, "Hey, you've done a wonderful job in life and are an exemplary Christian. Could maybe you broaden out a little bit and take over the oversight of the congregation just as well?" So we need that. We need deacons. We need good deacons. We lost Brother Jim Connors. Some of our deacons have grown older and are ill. Maybe we need new deacons, people to help with the affairs of the congregation. Maybe we're going to need some more elders down the road, not too long from now. And each of us as elders needs to look at ourselves and ask, are we doing, is the church being fed spiritually, directed and guided in a spiritual fashion? And are we out there being the examples so that they can see what needs to be done and how they ought to behave? It's a sobering sort of thought that you ought to look at. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about so long ago was the idea of more brotherhood. We need to be closer. We need to be closer. In Acts 20 and verse 35, Paul said, "I've showed you," speaking to the Ephesian elders, he said, "I've showed you all things, how that so laboring you ought to support the weak, and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, it's more blessed to give than to receive." Now this congregation, for the last, time flies while you're having fun, the last 12 to 15 years, has had a considerable membership that I would describe as weak in one way or another. And we need to examine whether we're doing our best to help these weak members by teaching, by support, by encouragement, by some sort of empathy, and by brotherhood, making these folks who we might describe as weak feel a part. We have tremendous divisions. We have people in this congregation who are very well educated and degreed, and we have other people who didn't quite get through the third grade. How do you make that a sense of brotherhood? We need to work on that. We need to make sure that that spirit exists. We have a lot of such divisions or possible divisions, and it can lead to an us and them mentality. We have some racial divisions in this church. We have some ethnic divisions in this church. Is it us and them? Or is it just us? It's an important thing to be aware of. Yes, we divide up into classes every now and then. Is it the young people and the old people? Is it the English speakers and the Spanish? Or is it us? Yes, I know why we divide up, so we can do a better job of teaching. But we still need to be sure that that concept of brotherhood exists among us. In Galatians 2, when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. Before certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles. But when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. When I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, if thou, being a Jew, livest after the manner of the Gentiles, as not do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? How people live, how they carry on their life, who their friends are, is not my business. I want folks to know that I am their brother spiritually. And I will stand by them and stand with them. And we need to convey that idea through this church. But in addition, into this us and them thing, look at a couple of other passages. As many of you as have been baptized into Christ to put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There's neither bond nor free. There's neither male nor female. You're all one in Christ Jesus. So this idea of needing more brotherhood isn't new. Paul was writing about it to the Galatians. They had all these distinctions. And in this congregation, as I indicated to you, we have folks that are well off. None of them will admit it, but they are. Live in fine houses and stay warm through the winter and well dressed. And there are others who are not as well off. And in any congregation, we're blessed in one respect. I've seen some churches lately that are stuck with one age group or another. You know, Bill called me last week. The church where they were worshiping, he said, they were sad because the congregation, it was a small church, sort of like us, maybe a little smaller, but it was all old people. Excuse the expression. They were all old people. You know, somebody 72, that's older than me. Old people. There weren't any kids, and it was a sadness. But we're blessed in that we've got age groups. We got both age groups. We got in-betweens. I don't know what they call them these days, which Gen X or whatever they are, but we've got all of them. But it's really possible that you don't know that other age group. You just don't know them. Why? Why? We're supposed to be brothers and sisters in Christ. We ought to know one another. Is the only people you know the people in your age group? And you don't, or you know, the people who sit on this side of the building and doesn't know the people that sit on this side of the building? We all get in that habit, you know. We don't know one another. And so, but another passage in this regard, in Acts 10, Peter opened his mouth, said, of a truth I perceive God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him. Now, if we're acceptable to God, we ought to be acceptable to one another, and we ought to convey that idea of brotherhood. Look at another couple of passages. I think here we go. John 17. I've given them thy word, and the world hath hated them, because they're not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I pray not that thou shouldst take them out of the world, but thou shouldst keep them from evil. They're not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. Thou hast sent me into the world, even so have I sent them into the world, and for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also might be sanctified through faith. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which believe on me through their word, that they may all be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. Now, folks, if we are not conscious of one another and are not loving to one another and do not associate with one another, how will the world believe that Christ is in us? That's the point. If we can't solve that notion of brotherhood among ourselves, old and young, rich and poor, white and black and brown, all one brotherhood, then we've failed in dealing with it. Now, this has been an issue. We have a person's legal status matters. It matters to the Lord. If any of you held up a bank and got away with it, you need to solve that problem. If any of you are not paying your taxes and haven't for a long time, you need to solve that problem. You've neglected your legal responsibilities. If you're living with one another without benefit of marriage, a legal marriage, you need to solve that problem, because those are all sins. There's a lot of these legal status things, as we have all been aware of for years now. We've fussed about them. And we have one member, Eugenio. I was talking with Brother Pong about him this morning. He's in jail, still awaiting the outcome of a trial. I think up in Chicago he's in jail, concerning his legal status. Little hope. They lost some paperwork, some fingerprints, I believe, and they got to check those. His ultimate decision's been put off till January, but this has drug on for him a long time, and it's a hardship to his family. So this is a problem. So Romans 13 says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. Don't imagine that it's one thing to defy the government, it's another thing to defy God. The two are one and the same. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. You know, I've heard people, I spoke about marriage a moment ago, I've heard people say, oh, well, marriage license is just a piece of paper. What are you doing? What are you doing? This passage directly relates to that. Whosoever resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. You're not just going to get in legal trouble. God's not going to be happy with you about it. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. He, the government, is a minister of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. You know, we never think that our illegalities are evil. The Bible here in Romans calls them evil. If you're resisting the government, refusing to obey its commands, the Bible calls it evil. He's the minister of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. He beareth not the sword in vain. He's the minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must need to be subject, not only for wrath, not only because the government's going to get you, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also. That's your taxes. Whew. Anybody in here like paying taxes? Raise your hand. Nope, didn't think so. Nobody likes paying taxes. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands who say we're paying too many taxes, too much taxes. Anybody want to raise their hand on that one? Yes, I got that. I'm raising mine. Too many taxes, sales taxes. My goodness, it just goes up and up and up. But the fact that we're disgusted with them, anybody think that the government spends the money wisely? I'm raising my hand on that one. I don't think they do. But why do I pay taxes? Because the government's going to get me? No, because he's the minister of God to me. Leanne over here, who works for the IRS, if you will, she's the minister of God. She's the one who collects those taxes. It's not nice to talk badly about her, because God's put her in that position as an agent of the government. They are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render to all therefore their dues. Tribute to whom tribute. Custom to whom custom. You need to show respect to the government. Honor to whom honor. Fear to whom fear. Honor to whom honor. Don't be bad-mouthing the policeman. Don't be calling them names. Don't be calling them pigs. You have an obligation as a Christian to render honor to these folks. Even if the other political party is in power, you have an obligation to render honor. Owe no man anything but to love one another. He that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. I'm taking too long on that. But in terms of that legal status, we might learn to be a little compassionate. Let me show you a passage. This is John 8. This, I'm not going to read this. I'm taking too long, and we'll be here all day if I keep dragging it out. This is the woman taken in adultery. You remember what Jesus said to her? Jesus, to the men who brought her in. Say, oh, we caught this woman in adultery. The Bible commands that we stone her. What did Jesus say to her? He says, first of all, he stooped down in verse 6 and wrote on the ground as though he wasn't hearing them. When they kept asking him, what are we supposed to do? He said, well, let him who is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. Oops. Which one of you is going to do that? Now, every now and then I hear rumors that somebody has violated some misdemeanor, some tenet of our law. I don't know it for certain, but I have rumors. Every now and then I hear one or two of you have a lead foot and you speed too much on the highway. Since occasionally I've been known to go over the speed limit, I'm not going to do much. They all left, and Jesus said to her, go thy way and sin no more. The point he was making was these men didn't stone people for adultery anymore. The law required it. They had gotten to where they didn't do it. It seemed too cruel, and probably there was a lot of adultery. Yet they wanted to test Jesus to see whether he would obey it. Well, Jesus chose this way to show compassion on this woman, the one who never has violated some law, some minor law of our government. Let him cast the first stone. So you might remember that passage. You might also remember that. I'm not going to read this either because I preached on it just a week or two ago. In Matthew 18, about the man who owed a fabulous amount of money. Matthew 18, and couldn't pay it. And his Lord forgave him all that. How much is God forgiven? You and I ought to be willing and ready to forgive other people. And generous with it. 1 Peter 4 says, let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. You know what? Now, Leanne over there, she's required to check your taxes, whether you've actually filed your taxes, but I'm not. I'm not going to be checking that. I'm not going to be checking the GPS on your car to see if you've been speeding. I'm not going to check your license. I'm not going to ask you to bring that thing out and show me your license. And I make sure it's up to date. By the way, I need to get mine renewed in the next month or two. I'm not going to be checking the insurance on your car to make sure it's actually insured. I'm not going to check those things. Why? Well, I'd be a busybody in other people's business if I did that, wouldn't I? I'm not also going to look for your marriage license. If you tell me you're married, I'm going to assume until I learn differently that you are married, that you fulfilled all the legal responsibilities to be married. I'm not going to check that. Why? Because that would be being a busybody in other people's business. And we need to learn the difference in that. And that will help and assist in our brotherhood, that we're not nosy britches. Alan was studying with you in 1 Corinthians 12 this morning. Do you remember that? Anybody in Alan's class remember what he was talking about this morning? About the various organs of the body. The more important ones are covered. We give them abundant honor. You know, Alan was talking about, we were talking about the kidneys. I think he was talking about Matt, poor brother Ronnie, who had to leave service this morning because of kidney stone. But you know, even in the prize fights, they tell those guys, you know, you got to wear your trunks up at your waist. You know, one of the reasons why, you know, you get hit right in the back, right in your kidney, you're not going to be fighting much longer. And that's an illegal punch. We give more abundant honor to the kidney. We're not going to let that happen in a fight. Otherwise, that guy's going to be on the ground if you can figure out how to punch him right above his kidney right away. You and I need to be able to do the same sort of thing. There are elements of our congregation who are poor. Some may be ignorant. Some may be desperate. We need to let them know we're their brethren and give them compassion. But in addition, this church needs to show concern for the lost. Concern for the lost. Luke 15, which man of you having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, does not leave the 99 into the wilderness and go after that which is lost until he find it? My wife has come to a definite tolerate-hate relationship with my dog. I didn't say love-hate, I said tolerate and hate relationship. She hadn't ever gotten all the way to love. But you know, if that goofy dog, which he has a time or two, wanders off, guess who will go through the neighborhood looking for him? She will, and I will. For that matter, 2 or 3 of our friends will. All of our kids will. They'll all be hollering his name, and he'll be ignoring that, by the way, if you know my dog, until we just rope and tie the rascal and bring him home. But you're going to care for the lost one. Now, we've got some members. If you'll look through your directory or look on that picture book back there in the back, we've got some members who are either wandering off or they've wandered off. They just don't come anymore. Are we concerned about the lost? Or are we just going to let them wander? It's an important question. You remember the story. He says, "Rejoice with me, I've found my sheep, which was lost." Joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth more than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. Paul says, "Though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law is under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law." Now, let me tell you something. Once in a while, we all get together and have a pitch-in. Some of these Spanish folks bring some food here that will set you on fire. Under the Spanish, we need to try to say, ooh-wee. We need to learn to appreciate that. They'll have to learn to appreciate hot dogs, I guess, or whatever food that they've had to learn to like here in the good old U.S. of A. It's an adjustment. To them that are without law is without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. My wife fuzzes at me, my mother fuzzes at me every now and says, "You're preaching over people's heads." Well, that's a serious sort of charge for me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And we need to be careful in dealing with people that we are associating with them to some degree on their level, so that there can be some sense of brotherhood. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. And we need to be concerned about our worship. Back at 2, the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him. You know, so many people religiously have gotten to where they just find lots of excuses not to worship. And somehow have the idea that, well, they can just worship at home just as well as they can at church. And so why bother? This church needs people who care about worshiping, who care about it, where it means something to them. In John 4, the hour cometh, and now is, when true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. 1 Corinthians 14, let all things be done decently and in order. We're not going to have a wild show, and we need more Bible study. I'm thinking about this. I haven't come to the conclusion. My home and my office, it's just become bedlam almost. Years and years ago, I had an office back here. And there's a heater back there. We don't heat this building when we're all not here. But I have thought about it. Some of you know that I escape every now and then in the warm months to a little boat I have down south, and I work down there. I don't sail all the time. I work most of the time. I take computers with me and work because it's quiet and I don't have interruptions and I can get things done. So I've been thinking about coming up here and having sort of being in my office. But my wife is saying, why don't we use the building? Why don't we just get together and read the Bible? Maybe people might come. Maybe a period of prayer. I know when I was in Nigeria, most of those churches had a service every morning. They would get together early in the morning, right at dawn, and sometimes just pray for a while. And then they'd scatter out to their jobs. But maybe we need more study like that, just reading and study and thought and prayer. In Acts 17, the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night unto Berea, who coming thither went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the scriptures daily whether these things were so. Do you know how embarrassing it is to find a Christian? A Christian. Been a Christian for a long time. Can't find the books of the Bible, who has to use the index. Come on. What's happened here? Your children need to learn the books of the Bible. They need to be able to turn back and forth in their Bible. First Timothy 4, till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. And in 2 Timothy 2, of these things put them in remembrance, charging them before the Lord, that they strive not about words to no profit, but to the subverting of the hearers. Study, give diligence, to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Do we do that as a group? Do you do that as individuals? It's what this church needs. Now then, I think we've made some improvement since I originally preached this sermon about 12 years ago. Can we make more? Can we do better? If you're here this morning and not a Christian, we'd like for you to become one. We need more people. We need more brothers and sisters in Christ. People to encourage in us, and people that we can encourage. If you're not a Christian, come while we stand and sing.